Hello friends, Lee here from Tabletop Bomb. In this video, I'm going to do something very different than I normally do in my videos. If you subscribe to my channel and you've been watching me in the past, you know typically when I am doing a video, I am showing you how to get the most out of a vaporizer, how to get the most out of the entire weed vaping experience, including the Tabletop Bomb, and tying it all together and showing you how to really, if you want to get blasted, how to get blasted. This video is going to be very different. In this video, I would like to address something a little more serious, a question that I've received a bunch of times. I'm just going to jump right into it. Is weed good or bad for your spiritual growth? This is a huge question. Let me start by explaining to you why I feel qualified to speak on this topic at all. I feel as though I'm qualified to speak on this topic because I have used weed through my own personal spiritual journey. I have worked through the pitfalls of using weed as part of a spiritual growth program. I know what the strengths and the weaknesses of using weed in this way. I know what they are, so I feel as though I'm probably qualified to speak about this particular point. During my spiritual journey that I've been on, obviously for most of my life, but really zeroed in on it maybe 20 years ago or so, from that time I've dug in deep to find as many spiritual answers as I can find. Weed has helped me absolutely along the way. But is it for everyone? No, I don't think so. The amount of effort that you need to put in and the amount of time you need to spend analyzing data to see if weed is helping or hindering your spiritual growth, that's the part that's not going to be for most people. I really took it apart and recognized, number one, what my own personal programming told me about weed and spirituality. We're all programmed during childhood, through things like TV, our family, religion, all these things. They all offer an opinion about this, and we take it in before we've developed our own opinion. So social programming and family programming becomes a very, very big part of this. When I started on my spiritual journey, I had a program that told me weed did not mix with spirituality, although I was a daily weed smoker at the time. So when I started and I wanted to learn meditation and deeper connection, my belief system told me that I could not, should not smoke weed before meditating, that I needed to keep that separate. But there was an inherent risk in that I didn't realize at the time, and this was a big deal for me. That was part of how I was achieving balance at the time, or as much balance as I could find within myself at that time. I think most people start their spiritual journey out of necessity, when everything is comfortable and life is moving forward and you don't have a lot of discomfort. There's no real necessity to dig into that part of yourself or to look further. So most people don't. It's when we're in a state of imbalance that we begin to search for something deeper meaning, deeper understanding. So if you're going to take yourself into a state of imbalance by not smoking weed when it's part of your balance, it's going to make your journey a little more uncomfortable in the beginning to get anything happening. And that's exactly what I went through. I wouldn't smoke weed. I sort of had this barrier in my mind, and the problem with that became that spirituality became something separate from the rest of my life because I wouldn't integrate those two things together. And weed was already part of my life, so it made spirituality sit on the outside instead of where it needs to be, right here on the inside. So when I realized that I was growing with discomfort each time I wanted to enter a spiritual practice or learn something new, whether I wanted to meditate, do energy work, whatever it might be, when I had that separation from weed, it made it uncomfortable. So much that I struggled, really struggled, to enter states of consciousness that would allow me to open up to greater understandings. So then I decided maybe it wasn't so bad if I was to have a little puff before meditation. So I sat and I thought about that very carefully and realized that weed has an energy all of its own. And we recognize that, and there's different plant strains that all carry a slightly different energy, but we know the basics: indica, sativa, ruderalis. They all have their own energy. They can be blended, combined, it can be changed. And when you take in those particular plants into your body, whether you're smoking, vaping, eating, however you get it into you, there's also a blending with your own personal energy that can't be predicted until it's experienced. So then I decided I was going to find the appropriate strain for what I wanted to do. I had a tendency to be very mentally over alert, I guess might be a good way to explain it. My mind went 1,000 miles an hour absolutely all the time. So to sit and quiet my mind for meditation, it seemed impossible with that starting point, especially when weed was part of my balance that helped slow that down. And then I took it away and said to myself, sit quietly, don't think anything. Wow, that seemed like an impossibility. So I selected an appropriate strain. I had a small amount, and I have to stress this, it was a small amount to try and see how it went from there. So I picked a strain that would slow me down and make me very relaxed, but not that would make me tired. I think actually the strain was Big Bud, which is a pure indica strain, but it doesn't give you the fatigue feeling. So I thought that was going to be a perfect trial to see what would happen if I blended weed and spirituality. So I had a little bit of Big Bud, and I went and I sat and I meditated successfully for more than 10 seconds for the first time. I realized maybe there was something to this. But I also realized if my starting point was different, if my entire core belief system was that weed was bad and it was not part of my life, it certainly would not have been something that would have helped my spiritual journey outright. But the key thing with this is investigating why you feel the way you feel about weed and spirituality is really a huge key to many, many things. If you have a super strong belief that weed is terrible and cannot help you on your spiritual path, that's a clue. Stop and look at what your programming is surrounding that. And then ask yourself simply, is that my thought? Or is that a thought that somebody else gave me? You can't really begin to even enter the conversation of whether weed is good or bad for spiritual growth until you make that very simple understanding and get yourself to a starting point where you can have an open-minded conversation with yourself about this. Some people use weed in different ways because they can get outside of themselves, which is sometimes what we need to do for our spiritual growth. We have to go into a state where we can observe without any real emotional attachment. We need to separate from ourselves and sometimes look down and see ourselves from a new angle, from a new perspective. But if you can't get out of your ego long enough to do that, because you're just spinning and swirling inside your head, well, perhaps a little puff, if that's already part of your life, is going to do exactly what you need, like it did for me. But you have to select your strain carefully. You have to know yourself and your own personal energy. You need to take the time to research what the strain will do. If you're a highly anxious person, you need to pick something that is going to soothe and calm you. If you're somebody who is already relatively sedated and you struggle to get into a creative space because you feel so sedate all the time, then perhaps a hybrid, a sativa leaning hybrid or something is going to help you with a little puff, just get into that new space within yourself. Because let's face it, isn't that what spiritual growth is all about? Is observing, learning, and adjusting into a higher frequency, into a greater understanding? If we allow ourselves to enter our childlike playfulness and imagination, in my experience, that is the place of spiritual growth. So how do you get there? Each person's different. Judging somebody for how they walk their path, that should tell you something about your own path. If you're sitting in judgment of another person because they use weed spiritually, or they don't use weed spiritually, that needs to be your starting point. You need to ask yourself why you're worried about what somebody else is doing on their spiritual path. We're all here to discover our own. But the most important thing I can say for sure is spiritual growth comes from imperfect action. And what that means, sometimes you need to just do something different, even if it's not perfect, even if it's not the right answer. It might just lead you to the next conversation that takes you in the direction that you need to go. But we have to be open to just jumping in. And if you're so reserved that you can't do that, perhaps investigating, having a little puff of weed or half a glass of wine. I don't necessarily think alcohol is a great thing for spiritual growth, but it might be the thing you need to get you outside of yourself long enough to allow growth to begin. Anyway, I guess that was a big rant, but at the end of the day, I just want to leave you with this simple idea. Each person is on their own journey, following their own path. If something feels right, and then it's worth investigation. If something feels completely wrong, like it's not for you, then it's probably not for you. You're not at that place in your journey. Your journey's taking you somewhere else. And it's okay. There is no right or wrong way to have a spiritual journey. Merely understanding that we are spiritual beings in this human experience, living and loving openly and without judgment. That's the place of spiritual growth. What it takes you to get there, who am I to decide? That's up to you. That's your journey. It's your path. But I hope you find exactly what you need along the way to keep your growth moving forward, to keep you in that positive and healthy space. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me rant about this and for letting me share my opinion with you. If you feel like you got something out of this video, please like and subscribe. Check out my channel at Tabletop Bong to see some really cool vaporizer action and bong action, the lighter side. Until next time, thanks so much for watching. Take care.